Ricardo was 47 when he discovered he no longer existed. Not literally, of course, but economically. For 22 years, he had been the best credit analyst at the bank where he worked. He knew every client by name, could interpret the most subtle signs in financial statements, had an almost supernatural intuition for detecting risks that numbers didn't fully reveal. Until one great Tuesday morning in March, when his boss called him for a conversation, the bank had implemented an artificial intelligence system that analyzed credit applications in 3.4 seconds. Its accuracy rate was 23% higher than Ricardo's. There was no room for discussion. He was being replaced by an algorithm that cost pennies to operate and would never ask for vacation, never get sick, never question decisions. Ricardo left that office feeling something he had never experienced before. The brutal sensation that 2 decades of knowledge, experience, and dedication were worth less than a few lines of code. If you're like millions of people who wake up every day with that growing anxiety that your skills might not be enough for the world that's emerging, I need to tell you about a transformation that has already begun and will redefine what it means to have value in society. A transformation that is silently creating a new class of people, the economically invisible. And Ricardo's story is just the beginning of something much larger and more disturbing than we imagine. Human history is punctuated by moments when revolutionary technologies redefined not just how we work, but who we are as a society. During the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century, thousands of artisans watched their manual skills being replaced by steam machines. Weavers who had spent generations perfecting their craft discovered that a single machine could produce in one day what took them weeks to create. Many of these workers became literally invisible to the new economic system that was emerging. Their skills no longer had market value. Their voices no longer mattered in decisions about production and commerce. They simply ceased to exist economically. But that transformation, however brutal, created new opportunities. The same workers who lost their traditional jobs eventually found new roles in factories. The industrial economy absorbed this displaced workforce, even if under precarious conditions. The fundamental difference between that revolution and the one we're living through today is that the digital and artificial intelligence revolution isn't just replacing human muscles with more efficient machines. It's replacing human minds with smarter algorithms. And that changes everything. When we talk about people becoming economically invisible, we're not talking about temporary unemployment or the need for professional retraining. We're talking about something much deeper and more disturbing. The real possibility that millions of human beings will simply have no relevant economic function in the society we're creating. Their brains, their cognitive abilities, their experience, accumulated over decades, may become irrelevant in the face of artificial intelligence systems that learn faster, process more information, and make more precise decisions than any human ever could. Think for a moment about a radiologist who spent 15 years studying to interpret medical exams. Today, artificial intelligence algorithms can detect cancer in X-rays with accuracy superior to experienced doctors. This professional's knowledge, built over decades, could become obsolete in a matter of years. But the issue isn't just about radiologists. Lawyers discover that AI systems can analyze contracts and legal precedents faster than entire teams of professionals. Journalists watch algorithms produce real-time news about financial markets with a speed and precision that surpasses entire newsrooms. Teachers face adaptive educational systems that personalize each student's learning in ways no human educator can replicate at scale. Economic invisibility doesn't happen dramatically. It settles in silently, like a tide that rises gradually until you realize you're being swallowed by the waters. First, you notice that some of your tasks are being automated. Then, you realize your colleagues are being replaced by digital systems. Next, your own position becomes redundant. And finally, you discover that not only has your job disappeared, but your entire area of knowledge has become irrelevant to the new economy. What makes this situation even more complex is that, unlike previous technological revolutions, the artificial intelligence revolution isn't creating new categories of work at the same speed, it's eliminating the old ones. During the transition from agricultural to industrial economy, and then from industrial to service economy, there were always new types of work that absorbed displaced workers. But when machines can think, learn, and make decisions, what kind of exclusively human work will remain? Some argue that there will always be jobs requiring creativity, empathy, and emotional intelligence, but even these traditionally human strengths are being challenged. Algorithms can already compose music, create art, and write poetry in ways many consider genuinely creative. Chatbots develop emotional relationships with users who prefer them to real human interactions. AI systems are beginning to demonstrate forms of artificial empathy that in many cases are more consistent and available than human empathy. The speed of this transformation is what makes everything more frightening. While the Industrial Revolution took generations to consolidate, allowing societies to adapt gradually, the artificial intelligence revolution is happening in decades, sometimes years. A middle-aged worker who loses their job to an algorithm doesn't have time to completely reinvent themselves. An entire generation of professionals may discover their skills have become obsolete before they even reach the peak of their careers. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of economic invisibility isn't just the loss of income. It's the loss of identity and purpose. For millennia, human beings have defined their value and identity through the work they performed. We were hunters, farmers, craftsmen, merchants. Our work wasn't just a source of livelihood. It was our contribution to the community, our way of leaving a mark on the world. When we lose our economic function, we don't just lose money. We lose our reason for being in a society that measures value through economic productivity. Let me pause for a moment to ask you directly, do you feel this growing anxiety about your professional relevance, this worry that your skills might not be enough for the world that's emerging? I know many of us carry these concerns in silence, pretending confidence while watching changes we can neither control nor fully understand. If this feeling resonates with you, share in the comments. My biggest concern about my professional future is that I'll become irrelevant when. Your honesty can help other people realize they're not alone in this uncertainty, and perhaps we can find ways to navigate this transformation together. The creation of a class of economically invisible people isn't just an individual or even economic problem. It's a deeply political and social problem. When millions of people lose their economic relevance, they don't simply disappear. They become a potentially destabilizing force for all of society. History shows us that large groups of people without economic prospects frequently turn to extreme political movements, radical ideologies, or social uprisings. Imagine a society where 30% or 40% of the population simply has no economic function. These people still have basic needs: food, housing, health, dignity. But in a system that distributes resources primarily through paid work, how can a society sustain such a large class of economically dysfunctional people? Proposed solutions range from universal basic income programs to the artificial creation of unnecessary jobs. But all these proposals face massive implementation and sustainability challenges. Universal basic income, defended by many as the solution to economic invisibility, may solve the problem of physical survival, but doesn't solve the problem of existential irrelevance. Giving money to people without giving them purpose could create a society of sustained but empty individuals, consuming digital entertainment to fill days without meaning. We might be creating not just an economically invisible class, but an existentially desperate one. Furthermore, the concentration of wealth that this technological revolution is generating is unprecedented in human history. While algorithms and robots replace workers, the owners of these technologies accumulate an ever-increasing percentage of global wealth. A small technological elite could become so economically powerful that the rest of humanity becomes irrelevant, not just as workers, but as consumers. When machines produce for machines, what purpose do human beings serve? This concentration of power isn't just economic, it's also cognitive. The companies that control the most advanced artificial intelligence systems don't just own the tools of production, they own the tools of thought. They determine which information we consider relevant, which decisions we consider rational, which futures we consider possible. Economic invisibility could be accompanied by intellectual invisibility, where most of humanity simply accepts the conclusions and directions determined by algorithms controlled by a minority. But not all is lost. Human history is also a story of adaptation and reinvention. Each major technological transformation has forced our species to redefine not just how we work, but how we live and what we value. The artificial intelligence revolution may force us to question some of the most fundamental premises about social organization and resource distribution. Perhaps it's time to reimagine what it means to contribute to society. For most of human history, social value wasn't measured solely through economic productivity. Elders were valued for their wisdom, artists for their creativity, spiritual leaders for their moral guidance. The modern obsession with economic productivity as the only measure of human value may be a historical aberration that needs correction. A post-work society could rediscover forms of value that transcend material production. Care, compassion, creativity, contemplation, community. These could become the new currencies of a human economy that functions parallel to the automated economy. But this transition requires a fundamental transformation, not just in our economic structures, but in our cultural values and educational systems. Education, specifically, needs to be completely rethought. We can no longer train people for jobs that won't exist. Instead, we need to develop capacities that are fundamentally human and have value independent of their immediate economic application. Critical thinking, emotional intelligence, creativity, collaboration, adaptability. These skills may not guarantee employment in the traditional sense, but they can guarantee relevance in a society that values distinctive human qualities. We also need to rethink the basic structure of our political societies. Democracy, as we know it, was developed for societies where most people had some economic function and therefore some political bargaining power. When a significant percentage of the population becomes economically irrelevant, how do we ensure their voices continue to be heard in decisions that affect their lives? How do we avoid the emergence of an authoritarian technocracy that makes decisions for masses of people considered incapable of contributing economically? The answer may lie in creating new forms of political and social participation that don't depend on economic power. Participatory democracies, citizen councils, decision-making systems based on collective deliberation. These approaches could give voice and agency to people who have lost their relevance in the traditional job market. Another possibility is the radical redistribution, not just of income, but of ownership of automated means of production. If robots and algorithms are the new workers, perhaps we should consider forms of collective ownership of these technologies. Instead of allowing an elite to concentrate all productive power, we could distribute ownership of automated systems among the entire population, ensuring everyone has a stake in the benefits of the technological revolution. This isn't just a matter of social justice, it's a matter of civilizational survival. A society where most people become economically irrelevant, while a minority controls all wealth and power, isn't sustainable in the long term. It will inevitably result in social conflict, political instability, and possibly civilizational collapse. The window for implementing structural changes is closing rapidly. Every day that passes, the concentration of technological power intensifies, making it harder to implement reforms that distribute this power more equitably. The decisions we make in the coming years about technological regulation, educational systems, economic structures, and political organizations will determine whether the artificial intelligence revolution results in a more just and human society or a dystopia where most of humanity becomes irrelevant. But there's also a personal and existential dimension to this transformation that cannot be ignored. Even if we solve the economic and political problems of economic invisibility, we'll still face the fundamental question of meaning and purpose in a post-work society. If machines can do everything better than us, what's the point of human existence? This may be, paradoxically, the most liberating question our species has ever faced. For millennia, we've been forced to work to survive. Most of our lives have been consumed by necessary but not necessarily meaningful tasks. Complete automation could, for the first time in history, give us total freedom to explore what it really means to be human. We could become a contemplative species dedicated to philosophy, art, and spiritual exploration. We could focus on developing deep relationships and authentic communities. We could explore the limits of consciousness, creativity, and compassion. We could become gardeners of the earth, caretakers of each other, explorers of inner and outer space. But this transformation to a more contemplative and creative existence won't happen automatically. It requires intention, preparation, and a fundamental change in how we think about value, purpose, and human fulfillment. It requires us to develop existential muscles that have atrophied during centuries of focus on economic survival. Meditation, philosophy, the arts, connection with nature, cultivating deep relationships, these practices, often considered luxuries in a productivity-focused society, could become the most important skills for navigating a post-work society. Not because they generate income, but because they generate meaning. And perhaps we'll discover that by freeing ourselves from the obsession with economic productivity, we'll be able to contribute to humanity in ways we never imagined. When we're no longer worried about basic survival, we can focus on questions like, how can we reduce suffering in the world? How can we increase beauty and compassion? How can we explore the deepest mysteries of existence? The artificial intelligence revolution could mark not the end of human relevance, but the beginning of a new phase of human evolution. A phase where our species finally has the freedom to explore its deepest potential, not limited by the needs of economic survival. But we've reached a point in our conversation where I need to be completely honest with you. This transition won't be easy or automatic. Millions of people will indeed become economically invisible in the coming decades. Many will suffer. Many will feel lost and without purpose. The difference between a smooth transition to a post-work society and chaotic social collapse depends on the choices we make now. It depends on recognizing that economic invisibility isn't inevitable. It's a political and social choice. We can choose to create systems that value and sustain all human beings regardless of their economic productivity. We can choose to distribute the benefits of automation equitably. We can choose to redefine human value and purpose beyond the ability to generate profit. Or we can choose to ignore this transformation until it's too late to guide it consciously and compassionately. We can allow blind market forces to determine who becomes invisible and who accumulates power. We can passively accept a future where most of humanity becomes irrelevant to a technological elite. The choice is ours. But the window to make this choice is closing rapidly. Every day we spend debating whether automation is good or bad is one less day to build the social, economic, and political structures necessary for a just and human transition. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to this channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we're witnessing. The artificial intelligence revolution is the greatest transformation our species has ever faced. It could lead us to irrelevance and invisibility, or it could free us to discover deeper and more meaningful forms of human existence. The outcome depends on the choices we make now, individually and collectively. We can't avoid this transformation, but we can guide it. And guiding it consciously and compassionately may be the most important challenge we'll face as a species. The future of humanity isn't determined by algorithms or blind economic forces. It's being determined moment by moment by the choices we make about how we want to live together in this world we're creating. And this responsibility, this capacity for conscious choice is perhaps the one thing no machine can ever take away from us.
When the Industrial Revolution erupted, a lot of people said that the only way to build an industrial society is to build an empire. Why? Because you need to control the sources of raw materials and the markets of the industry. So any country that industrialized, first Britain, but also then France and Belgium and Germany and Japan, they all built empires because people thought this is the only way to build an industrial society, with terrible consequences for hundreds of millions of people, not just in India, but in many other parts of the world. Another experiment was totalitarian regimes, that people thought the only way to build an industrial society is to build a totalitarian regime like Nazi Germany or like the Soviet Union, because they thought the only way to control the immense power of industry is if the government controls everything, the economy, society, culture, totalitarianism. Now we know that these were mistakes, that there are better ways to build industrial societies.
AIs are able to learn and change by themselves, to make decisions by themselves, to invent new ideas by themselves. If a machine cannot do that, it's not really an AI. So a coffee machine that just makes you coffee automatically, but by a pre-programmed way, and it never learns anything new, it's just an automatic machine. It becomes an AI if, as you approach the coffee machine, the machine, before you press any button, addresses you and says to you, I've been watching you for the last weeks or months, and based on everything I've learned about you and your facial expression and the time of day and so forth, I predict you would like an espresso, so I already took the liberty to make a cup for you. If it then tells you, actually, I've invented a new drink that no human ever thought about before, I call it Bespresso, and I think it's better than espresso, you would like it more, and I took the liberty to prepare a cup for you, then it's really an AI.
How do you think AI will change storytelling from what it used to be?
Stories are some of the most powerful technologies in history. Whether it's the story of Jesus or whether it's the story of money, this is really the foundation of human civilization, is stories. Everything else is built on top of it. And for tens of thousands of years, the only entities on this planet that could create stories, either create new stories or elaborate and interpret old stories, were human beings. Only the human mind was capable of doing it. And now we have on this planet another entity which is capable of spreading and interpreting and ultimately creating stories. And it's only the beginning, it's nothing, it's just 10 years since the AI revolution began. We haven't seen anything yet.